God bless. This is NFL Moneyball, brought to you by NFL Extended Strategic Principles, or NFL ESP, found on the web at nfl-esp.com. I am your host, Mark Anthony DeBello. For more information on me and this program, you may go to markanthonydebello.com and then click on the Sports tab. Today is Saturday, officially, January the 16th. It's 3:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. I had recorded a show earlier, but erroneously recorded the wrong one and made a technical error. So I am now recording again a version of the Divisional round of NFL Moneyball. And again, this program will last 1/2 hour. The goal is to spread the word or preach football. I will cover the games from last week in the wild card round, which we analyzed quite well, thank God. Cover the games this week, and then the games next week and leading up into the Super Bowl. Again, we look at the four aspects of NFL ESP, which are the spiritual, motivational, X's and O's, which is typically play design, and then the strategic, which is primarily based on our exclusive use of a number we call the power spread, a number that's been proven to increase a team's win productivity by at least 10 to 15% in the pros and 10 to 25% in the collegiate ranks. Of course, this data we most use to help a team with its basic strategy decisions, but it's also quite insightful to those of you who have an interest in Las Vegas, and in addition, those of you who have an interest in fantasy football. So I like to begin the program by discussing some cultural and societal issues with regards to the game and how that might relate to, again, a team's basic strategy decisions or perhaps a Nevada or a Las Vegas interest, and lastly, a fantasy football interest. One of the notes I want to make is, again, the inaccuracy of many in the media. I respect that they have a job. I don't respect that they don't tell the truth, or they give an opinion which they call their truth. They say, I'm paid to tell you the truth. No, they're paid to give an opinion that they hope is the truth. More times than not, they're actually wrong. It's an affront to me. Certain people have a platform and are overpaid in that platform to give inaccurate advice. In fact, one of our plays from last week, our best play of the weekend and one of the best plays of the season, was Green Bay over Washington. And before I break down that game, I knew we had a winner when I heard Michael Strahan say that his best buddy, Kevin Hart, who is just a terrible comedian, just terrible, just because you scream and tell racial jokes doesn't make you a comedian. Well, he and Strahan both picked the Redskins. It was doubly beneficial to me, who knew we liked Green Bay as our best play, that Rob Riggles, who does the comedic, again, not very funny, segment on the Fox broadcast, picked Washington. I automatically knew then that you could just, as they say, quote-unquote, send it in on Green Bay, knowing that those two, I just don't know how they get that platform and can even make picks. But anyway, having said that, there's some other broadcasters, and I have a list if you want to find more information on the blog. You can reach through nfl-esp.com. You can hear past broadcasts of this show this year and last year, this podcast, and then you can also hear or read some of the blog. And I also want to go over a little bit some of the coaching changes that have already taken place and such in the NFL. I already want to give some early insights on that as our research period begins after the first game, the first day of the final game of the regular season and through the postseason. And the first phase especially includes coaching changes, both pro and con, positive and negative. So I'll go over some of those briefly now, leading up until next season, and then go over the games from last week. So I already mentioned, again, I'll go over the games from last week first, and then the coaching. No, let me do the coaching changes. Sorry about that. I'm a little discombobulated. As far as coaching changes go so far, Coach Coughlin with the Giants, he's the best coach out there that's available. How he got, lost his job, when we attest the greatest influence on or negative influence of the Giants is quarterback Eli Manning. He's overrated, not highly power rated. I believe he shouldn't have got the contract he got. They'd be better off with their combination of Nassib and Beckham. Beckham's the highest rated player on that team by far. I made notes of that all season long. Actually, Coach Coughlin, from my statistical information, he was a very tough disciplinarian coach, and when he was that and he won the Super Bowl, his players all, and you can read reports of this, got on his case and told him to be friendlier and nicer. Well, as soon as he got friendlier and nicer, his team's productivity in relation to also their win-loss record went down. In addition, as he's gone down, his win-loss record, the productivity and performance of Eli Manning has as well. But again, Coach Coughlin is a fantastic coach, top perhaps 3 in the league, if not number 2, next to Coach Belichick, and he certainly was not the reason for the Giants losing. In relation to that, they're hiring Coach McAdoo. Their offensive coordinator, I think, is a bad hire. It's not going to help the Giants. It's sort of, for lack of a better metaphor, enabling Eli to do what he's been doing. And no disrespect to Eli, I wish I was a pro quarterback. God bless him. But he is overrated and not producing very well, and that's the reason for the Giants losing. So any team that gets Coach Coughlin is really getting is going to improve, because there's not too many better than him. As for some other coaching changes, I see the Eagles got a new coach. That can only be a benefit unless they get another bad hire, as we forecasted with Chip Kelly is going to mismanage the Eagles, and he did that. I don't know much about this Peterson that they got from Kansas City, but he's under the Andy Reid regime, and Coach Reid didn't have the top-level power rating of our coaches the years he was with the Eagles, so I don't know that that's an improvement from Coach Kelly. I don't know that it could get much worse than Coach Kelly. And speaking of which, San Francisco's hire of Coach Kelly I don't think is a good hire as well. I do like Colin Kaepernick in a fast-paced offense, but again, if you're an underdog and you're not a better team like talent-wise like San Francisco, the last thing you want to do is try to speed up your offense. You really want to slow the game down. That's just a basic NFL, ESP, and mathematical, philosophical sports principle. One apparently went by Coach Kelly and his guru, who actually was a former associate of mine, but he unwisely chose to break off from my team, NFL ESP team, early on in our formation, and it's proven unwise on their part. So again, I'm not sure about Coach Peterson improving the Eagles, but again, I don't think Coach Kelly is going to improve the Buccaneers. Another change, a coaching change that of note, is Tampa Bay in the NFC South. Got rid of Coach Smith. I'm not sure why. I think Coach Cutter, I know he's well respected. That might have something to do with the quarterback-head coach relationship. I know Coach Smith was really high on getting Jameis Winston. They didn't give him much of a chance to turn that around, for as respected as Coach Smith was. So I think there's some inner turmoil or workings you don't quite hear there. Something similar to what happened with the Jets as we forecasted this season. with them replacing Geno Smith at quarterback, how they would improve dramatically. It wasn't necessarily the departure of Rex Ryan that helped the Jets. The Jets were going to improve anyway because they had Ryan Fitzpatrick at quarterback instead of our lowest rated quarterback in perhaps a decade, starting quarterback anyway, Geno Smith. As for some other coaching changes, I know that the Lions are keeping Coach Caldwell. I'm not necessarily against that. I think Coach Caldwell's a pretty solid coach. I'm not sure why the Lions faltered this year. I don't want to, give all the analysis. Would love to work with them. But having said that, again, I can quote on that later after I've done more study. As far as finishing up in the coaching changes, let's see, we're looking at the Titans, I think, changed. It got rid of Coach Wisenhunt. I think that was a wise move. I'm not sure who they have in there now. I'll have to follow up on that. I think Coach Pagano wasn't necessarily the fault for the Colts. Certainly Andrew Luck going down. He was a 9-point ranking quarterback. Typically a quarterback is power rated between 1 and 9 points on a team, and if your average team scores, your winning team scores 24 points, that shows you the percentage of value that a quarterback is, over 33% basically in that model. 9 of 24 points, 21 points is attributed the average toward a losing team. In the AFC North, the Cleveland Browns got a new coach. As I noted, Coach Pettin, I don't think they worked Coach Johnny Manziel properly at quarterback. I think he's going to need a new team. I'm not a big believer in Coach Jackson, and I just think there's too much turmoil and turnover in Cleveland, as a lot of people will tell you. If they ever got Coach Coughlin, I think they would do great. But again, you have to figure out Johnny Manziel. As we always had Johnny Manziel power rated quite highly, but he really needs to be, in an organization where he can have some, work on his Christianity, because I do believe he's a Christian, and then work on his confidence. As I once heard a quarterback recently say, a Hall of Fame quarterback, and I think I've heard it repeated more than once, that the greatest attribute of any NFL quarterback is confidence. They need to have confidence. It was Aaron Rodgers, actually, that said that, and in order to lead as well. So anyway, moving on. I think that I'm not sure if the Chargers or Raiders made a change. I'll have to get my head wrapped around that. And I think that basically ends the coaching changes carousel. I know the Dolphins got a new coach. I wasn't impressed, I don't think, with who they hired. I wasn't sure, but it didn't stand out to me. I'll have to look at my notes. Wasn't my main focus of this message. The only other note I'll make with regards to league-wise, before I get into last week's games and then this week's games from the three perspectives of basic strategy, Las Vegas, and fantasy, was the move from the Rams to from St. Louis with Mr. Kroenke, taking them to Los Angeles, back to Los Angeles. I prophesied years ago, after the Lakers left the Forum and went to the Staples Center, that God wanted the Forum to be a church. I actually walked in there, told somebody there, a janitor or somebody in an organization there that was wondering what to do with the building, and they basically scoffed, mocked, and laughed at me, and booted me out of the place. Well, sure enough, a couple years later, there was a church there called Faithful Central. I think it's still there, even though they use the venue. They also use the venue for concerts and stuff. So God had told me that. God told me what He was going to do. He's going to tell me what He wanted, and sure enough, around the same time or a little bit thereafter, He also said, and you can find this information on either my Facebook page or, again, the website, or even markanthonydebello.com. I know I've tried to tell as many people who I could who would listen, that God also wanted a team out where Hollywood Park formerly was, the racetrack, and call them the Los Angeles Archangels. So not surprisingly, Mr. Kroenke got that land, got that property. That's where they're going to build the stadium there in Inglewood. We have an office right there in Inglewood. I'm not disappointed the Rams are going back. If any team, other than a new expansion team called the City of Angels or Los Angeles Archangels would go back, there would be the LA Rams, who used to be there. But again, I don't believe the Chargers should go up there, and I don't believe the Raiders should go down there. I think the NFL has room for expansion. I don't want to name all the cities. I know people talk about San Antonio. I don't doubt that you could support a team in Portland. I know you could support a second team in Los Angeles. A lot of people talk about. I do have another city in mind. I don't want to mention at this time, but one way or the other, or at least get one of the teams like perhaps Jacksonville to leave Jacksonville. I don't know that that's the best market. I think the NFL made a mistake putting a team there. They should have had their ducks in a row and followed what I had prophesied and suggested when they last expanded to get a team in LA that should be in there. That even should have been the Archangels at that time. But what are you going to do? I haven't met Commissioner Goodell. I did just recently meet NBA Commissioner Silver, which I appreciated the opportunity to do, and just recorded NBA Moneyball, which you can find online. But again, that's another story for another day. But the hope is to just, be a more vital part with a bigger voice in the league, to the glory of God, because he loves the NFL. He loves all major sports leagues. He loves sports. And as you'll see written on my blog, he knows and he loves sports. So anyway, we're about halfway through the program, so let me go to last week's game and do a recap, and then move forward and make a couple other notes here to share with you. One of the things I had mentioned already, the Green Bay-Washington game, so we'll start with that. I heard the announcers, Chris Collinsworth especially, who seems to, he likes to relate. I think it was Chris Collinsworth who did this game, who's not a very good prognosticator. He's a pretty good announcer, though. I give him points for that, and God bless him, he was a receiver in the league. I wish I was. But he, and I think it was Al Michaels who calls the game with him, kept saying how Green Bay, they had the wind at their favor in the second and fourth quarters, and that's why they did better. No. Why they do better in the second and fourth quarter is that's a better team of quote-unquote favorites, power quarters. The underdog typically performs better in the first and third quarter, and the better team in the second and fourth. It's just it's a law of nature, okay? That the cream sort of rises to the top, if you will. So Washington ended up winning the first quarter 5-0. They tied the third quarter 7-7, and then Green Bay won the second quarter 17-6, and the fourth quarter 11-0. It had very little to do with the win. It had more to do with just the quality of the competition and the teams, and the announcers seem to miss that. They also seem to miss, they talked about a hot team going into the playoffs, and I'll get to Kansas City in a minute. But they were saying that Green Bay was a cold team and Washington was hot. No, it's the strength of the schedule is more important than anything, and the matchups and the power rankings and the power spread differential and who they're playing. It's just, a quirk of fate that, let's say, Kansas City played 4 or 5 teams or the scheduling and had the 4 or 5 playoff teams at the beginning of the schedule. Then they played non-playoff teams 10 or 11 in a row. So it makes them look much better than they are. But we'll get to that game in a minute. So our best play of the week was Green Bay. Well, actually, you could hear me predict. I believe I totaled the score at 35-17 or 35-21. I knew Green Bay would land on 35. I actually even tweeted it, and sure enough, that was the final. Green Bay ended up winning that game 35-18. In another game, I was really blessed to predict and tweet. A result was the Seattle-Minnesota game. I had mentioned that was a really close game, 2 good defenses, that Minnesota might be the new Seattle, that Seattle would probably win, and Minnesota end up covering from a Las Vegas perspective. That's just what happened, and actually tweeted, because God somehow or another sent an angel to tell me, believe it or not, that Blair Walsh would miss that short field goal and not cost Minnesota the game, but Minnesota would lose the game. I tweeted it out. God doesn't lie. He knows. God knows everything. If you don't know him, you don't know nothing. You don't know anything. So, anyway, I was very blessed to call that game accurately. Called it low scoring. Probably wasn't the only one to do that because of the cold weather. But again, 2 good teams and a low scoring game and a close scoring game is a defensive battle is typically a lower scoring game. That's why your basic strategy decisions with regards to NFL ESP need to be more precise and more important. Actually, one other thing that I noted in that game that I saw, and we talk about home field advantage. Minnesota doesn't get a lot, and I see they didn't get a lot in that college stadium. They should get a lot more home field advantage when they're in a new stadium, enclosed, noisier, a new stadium. They got a Super Bowl coming there. That'll play a deep-seated psychological effect on the officials when it comes to refereeing Minnesota games. But again, they didn't get a lot of calls. Contrarily, Seattle, who's used to getting a lot of home calls, I saw a lot of Russell Wilson long passes, at least 2 or 3, where he really arcs the ball high, underthrew it a couple times, but a lot of actually I'll say one of the three passes that he threw, one of those would have been an interference call had he been in Seattle. I mean, that's just an old play that we used to devise. I devised in the CFL. I don't want to say too much about it here, but pass interference is the greatest, most biased home field call you can possibly get. It could end up, theoretically being a 90-yard penalty, basically, as far as you can throw it. So I know, Russell Wilson, I think, is just groomed to throw that high, long pass, hoping it's either, you either get the pass interference call, you might do it on, let's say, third and double digits, and if it gets picked off, it's more or less like a long punt, or you make sure that your just receiver defends it well, and it's just a toss-up, and you've got a percentage chance to make the catch. You're not really running a distinct pattern. But anyways, I just had noticed that, and I think that really came to fruition. In the other two games, we had Cincinnati against Pittsburgh, and projected and predicted and that Pittsburgh would beat Cincinnati narrowly, and they did. 18-16 was the final in that one. Cincinnati typically gets a lot of home calls. They showed their lack of discipline, which we've always noted. They're a very, if they don't get their home calls, which they didn't really get in this wild card game, they're not going to win. Pittsburgh, we had ranked as the better team on the road. I think it was their second or third straight road game. I might be wrong about that. I have to look at my notes. But either way, we predicted that one properly, and I don't think that Cincinnati, did enough to overcome. Actually, that was Pittsburgh's third straight road game, which is really tough to win, especially in Cincinnati. And you're going to really see something unprecedented here, and we'll get to the next week's game with Pittsburgh going into Denver for our fourth straight road game. I mean, I can't think of the last time I saw any team playing four straight on the road, and then having to go to altitude-high Denver. That's going to be something. I'll talk about that in a minute. In the last game, or at least the first one in the playoff round, we had Kansas City thumping Houston. Not surprised by that. We knew Kansas City was a better team. Thought that game might be more high scoring for Houston, but again, it really breaks down to the quarterback, and the least ranked quarterback of all the ones basically in the wild card playoff round was Brian Hoyer. Actually, even less than Kirk Cousins, and even less than Teddy Bridgewater, who was probably the next lowest. And he got picked off multiple times and just played poorly, and they're just not that, we were surprised they even got in the playoffs, although I had altered that from Indy. Andrew Luck going down is what really cost Indy. But Kansas City we liked, thought they were, even underrated in a sense, as they had a very, very tough schedule, one of the toughest, and we had them power ranked quite high all year long. So for us, it wasn't a surprise when they won 11 in a row and made the wild card and actually won this game. It was a surprise to everybody else, just like, we weren't surprised Washington won the NFC East. And again, if you put up, from a media standpoint, for the last 15 years, you're not going to hear anything more accurate or read anything more accurate than what, I'm blessed to project from NFL ESP. So having said that, just had a really, efficient and accurate week last week. So let's get into this week's games, and then moving forward to the rest of the, albeit brief games left here in the NFL. So this week, the first game that's on tap, and we're going to try to, again, cover them from all three perspectives, is Kansas City, New England. Initially, I had projected that it'd be Denver and Kansas City in the AFC Championship. I did a little bit more studying. If Kansas City wins, they're a defensive team. New England is home. The power spread in that game is about 5. It should probably maybe about 4.5. It should probably be a little bit more, to be honest. It should be about 6 or 7, including the home field advantage. New England does get a lot of, probably one of the biggest home field advantages in the league. I would at least put their home field advantage at 6 alone, or maybe 7. So that means that game is basically even on a neutral field. That's not true. New England, I think, is still a tad better than Kansas City. And again, overall, this whole scope of this divisional playoff, as I projected, is one of the toughest seasons I've seen in years. These teams are all really, really close. So again, in that game, I would have to lean now toward New England. I hate to go back on my initial thoughts, or at least thoughts from, a week before, but typically what you'll see in a wild card and even the divisional round is, and this also includes from a Vegas perspective, You'll see 3 favorites win and 1 underdog win outright, and of the 3 favorites that win, 2 will cover the quote-unquote Vegas version of the spread, and 1 will win but not cover. In this game, if Kansas City isn't the underdog that wins, then Seattle will be the underdog that wins, and I'll get to that game momentarily. If Kansas City loses, then again Seattle will probably be the underdog who wins, and if Kansas City wins, then actually Carolina might end up beating Seattle. But anyways, I would have to probably lean toward New England in that game, and I have no real clear-cut indication of the total. So going on to the next game, Green Bay is playing Arizona. As I mentioned, Green Bay was one of the better bets of the season last week. I think that they're going, they beat the weakest team in the division by far, or in the conference playoffs, Washington, or in all the wild card playoffs, Washington. Green Bay is not as strong as they used to be. We had Green Bay and Arizona playing in the NFC Championship from the beginning of the year, so I think these are perhaps still the 2 best teams near the top in the NFC. We had Seattle, Arizona, Green Bay, and Seattle basically in that order. So this would normally be your division your conference championship. But since they're facing each other now, I still think Arizona is the clear-cut better team. I think they could actually go through that power spread number, which is 7 points. From a fantasy perspective, though, I wouldn't necessarily go with Carson Palmer. Typically in fantasy, what I've noticed is if you're a clear-cut favorite and you're going to win, that's when you really want to focus on the running backs and got a solid running game. A quarterback, for instance, like last week, Kirk Cousins, they didn't win the game, but he was I think the highest-rated fantasy quarterback. So if you win the game and you're a throwing team, your fantasy quarterback is going to be rated high. If you lose the game, your fantasy quarterback might still be rated high because they've got to throw a lot of balls to catch up, and typically that's how underdogs win. They win because they have a passing game. They don't typically win by outrunning or playing a team on defense. Kansas City's big fantasy points last week. They are a defensive team. They won handily. They scored big defensively, on fantasy. I had both the Green Bay running backs actually, and one of the wide receivers, so we did pretty well with Green Bay last week. Again, they're the highest scoring team of all the playoff teams, scoring 35 points. We actually had it right in order, basically. Green Bay first at 35, Kansas City second. I think I had it 31 or 28, something like that. So, anyway, very blessed with that. But again, I see Arizona, outplaying Green Bay. If you're Green Bay, and I like Coach McCarthy, you better really do something aggressive to manufacture some points. Arizona's going to get the home calls, probably about 5 or 6 point home favorite there, home field advantage. But again, Green Bay is going to have to take some chances. I like the chance that the team took last week with the onside kick. Green Bay could do something like that, go for a 4th down. They're going to have to get turnovers. I don't know that they're going to do that. Their defense isn't that strong. So again, they're going to have to make aggressive, basic strategy decisions to win that one. The next game up on Sunday, the first game is Seattle, Carolina. Again, as I noted all year long, if Carolina doesn't lose this game, they will lose next game to Arizona. Carolina is not the Super Bowl representative in the NFC. I said repeatedly they're overrated. If Seattle wasn't playing its third, I think, straight road game, I would definitely believe Carolina is going to win. But again, I think Seattle is the better team, power rank the better team. I think the public still thinks Carolina is good. They're not that good. So if you had to have a live underdog this game, it would be Seattle. I think these are too good. I don't know why it seems the public is playing over in this game, over 44 points. I think it's going to be a lower scoring game. I would definitely go opposite the public, but you've got 2 solid teams here, so I would expect a lower scoring game with good defenses in that one. In the final game, Pittsburgh's playing Denver. Initially, we liked Denver. I still like Denver. I don't necessarily like the move to Peyton Manning. I think they're more highly rated with Brock Osweiler at quarterback. And I think what you're going to see is Pittsburgh playing tough defensively, believe it or not. Denver, if Peyton Manning makes some mistakes, as I think he will, probably not in the first half. If he does in the first half, then they'll bring Osweiler in. Because I think the Pittsburgh defense is going to be stout to start the game. They are clear-cut power spread underdog. But I'll say this, 7.5 points, which the power spread is now, at least the Vegas version of the spread, is too many points. I can see Denver winning by as little as 3 or 4 in that game. But I wouldn't necessarily invest in Pittsburgh, especially if Roethlisberger's out, and I think the best wide out perhaps in the league is Antonio Bryant, and he's been declared out. Missing the running back, that's not so bad. Todman can fill in, and so can the kid ahead of him, as Pittsburgh's done in the past with the running game. But I think you're going to see Denver win that game by like 3 points. But again, I think they're more highly power rated with Osweiler, and they better be wise and not fall far behind with Peyton Manning throwing interceptions or committing turnovers, and get Osweiler, in there. So anyway, so having said that, that's the divisional round as I see it right now. Hopefully with the insight and mind of God, and all power and glory to Him. Should I be correct? If I'm wrong, it's only because of my own ineptness and imperfectness. But anyway, thank you to those who have listened and to those who listen. This has been NFL Moneyball, brought to you by NFL ESP. I am your host, Mark Anthony DeBello. Thank you, and God bless you.